doesn't matter if your game is a turn-based strategy, first-person shooter, or a colourful mobile game where you have to match coloured gems to make an anime girl show you her tits. At some point you're going to have to explain to the player how to play the bloody thing. And for that we have tutorials. Some games will require more of it than others. The turn-based strategy might require hours of onboarding. The last example could probably get by with a single window with a picture of some matched colours and an arrow leading to some tits. But every game has it in some form. These days the popular style of mainstream game design tends to integrate player training with the initial gameplay, with contextual prompts and the like. Try to think of how many times you've played an action-adventure game where early on you have to pass through a collapsed doorway, or whatever, and that's when they teach you how to crouch walk. Most games will also have mini-tutorials scattered through the game each time a new mechanic is introduced, all of which is fine, but like every other gameplay mechanic, there was a lot of stumbling through the wilderness before it was perfected. And there's one specific era of tutorials I'm unapologetically nostalgic for, and so I present a video essay I choose to call The Lost Art of the Tutorial Level. It might be hard to consider this in today's contextual button prompt golden age, but integrated tutorials are a relatively recent invention. Before a certain age, games were in a never-ending battle with memory limits and not a single byte could be wasted. There just wasn't room on the cartridge or the floppy disk for the extra text and art assets a tutorial might require, and why bother? After all, manuals were a thing, and purchasing games in non-physical forms that didn't come in boxes were inverse proportionally not a thing. You needed the manual to explain how to get the game running anyway, why not also explain how to play the game while you're there? If any of you young emulator-using whippersnappers have ever tried to play, say, a classic Amiga strategy-stroke management game like Syndicate or Theme Park or the original XCOM, you might have noticed that such things are, to the modern eye, completely fucking incomprehensible, or mysterious iconography on densely packed together buttons, because these games were designed on the assumption that the player would have the instruction manual spread across their thighs to refer to as they played, and there was little incentive to change because at the time these games had a captive audience. Entertainment media was less widespread, less competitive. Where the hell else were you going to play turn-based strategic combat games, you fucking Etch-a-Sketch? But the situation did change, as so many others did, in the mid to late 90s. The rapid improvement of PC processors and introduction of CDs meant there was suddenly more than enough memory for all the integrated tutorials anyone could ask for, and PC gaming found itself increasingly in competition with the much friendlier to lower attention spans world of consoles. Yahtzee, I have this sinking feeling you're about to wax nostalgic for the late 90s, early 2000s era of PC first-person games again. Well, you know what, viewer, I'd argue there are a few eras of gaming one could more justifiably be nostalgic for. It was a time for innovation like no other, as technology unlocked more potential scope for game design than had ever been possible before, when developers with vision on a new frontier of creation were not yet hampered by traditionalism, censorship, or the demands of corporate interest. Yes, early 3D graphics made everything look like it was made of egg cartons and string, but you had to look past that, and the quirky commonality between much of my favourite post-Quake luminaries of the immersive sim genre was the segregated tutorial level, an entirely separate mission in which the player and player character were trained in the skills they would have to employ in the open quotes real game. Sometimes it'd be a separate menu option like the Half-Life Hazard course or the Deus Ex training level. Sometimes it was technically integrated with the critical path, like the training in System Shock 2 and Thief, but there was still a very tangible barrier between it and the actual game. Typically, your tutorial level was an obstacle course themed around the protagonist being trained for their upcoming work, sometimes with the assumption that combat would be involved, as in Deus Ex, sometimes having to rather awkwardly contrive a way for an associate in a research facility to be learning how to fire a gun. You'd go from one room to the next where some NPC voice would patiently explain the next mechanic and walk you through the button presses required. It says something for the innovative spirit of the era that these games all needed to take extra time to explain their mechanics, for we were evolving beyond point to the man and shoot the man, but I will absolutely not argue that these levels were better at player training than the standard integrated tutorials of today, because they bloody weren't. Learning on the fly in the intended context has long proved to be the most efficient teaching method. Half the time you'd forget all about a mechanic because you did it once in the middle of learning 4 other mechanics 8 hours of gameplay ago. As part of the Half-Life Hazard course, you're trained in the use of a long jump module, and that doesn't show up in the actual game till the very end. But the tutorial level had its advantages. For one thing, not having to integrate tutorials means you don't have to design the first level around contriving a reason to have us crouch walk under partially collapsed doorways, and everything else that needs explaining. The story can cut straight to the chase, as it were. Like in Deus Ex, where you arrive at Liberty Island and immediately have to deal with a terrorist occupation with multiple solutions, and when your content contact offers you your choice of weapon before you go in, you can say, "Hand me that rocket launcher," and forewarn the janitorial staff. Thief can jump straight to the Lord Baffort's Manor level, with Garrett already fully trained and at the peak of his career, without some earpiece goblin needing to remind him how to bop guards on the bonce. Besides that, there's also something strangely compelling about playing through a tutorial level that you don't get from the serious game. I've played through the Half-Life Hazard course and the related boot camp level in the Opposing Force expansion quite a few times, and not because I needed a refresher. It was weirdly fun to play around with the game's mechanics for 10 minutes in a zero-pressure environment. If you're seeking the sense of achievement that comes from playing video games, following simple instructions and getting massively overpraised for it by a pre-recorded NPC voice is one way to get that high. It's not much of a high, but it is a lot easier to get, the same advantage sniffing glue has over injecting heroin, and I can't be the only one, because after Black Mesa recreated Half-Life, it didn't take long for fans to recreate the Hazard course for it as well. It's even got its own speedrunning community. But there's even more to it than that. The tutorial level was also an opportunity for world building and establishing context. The Hazard course gives you the utterly unique experience of being in the Black Mesa research facility while everything's still fine and functioning as intended. You get a sense for the work culture and the day-to-day lives of the inhabitants, and that helps build immersion. It lends greater tragedy to the disaster that kicks off the plot. Again, there are fan-made mods based around redesigning Half-Life's levels to look like how they looked pre-accident, because it's interesting to see if you're invested in the story. The Deus Ex training level features dialogue with multiple NPCs you can't get in the main game that sets up the world and setting and establishes the relationship JC Denton has with these people. Getting instructions from an actual NPC who lives in this world is much more fertile ground for storytelling than an emotionless button prompt. Of course, innovation always takes the path of maximum efficiency, and in the end integrated tutorials proved far more efficient, and so the non-integrated tutorial became an increasingly rare sight in modern mainstream games. Still, they live on in our hearts and our video essays. Thank you for indulging this shamelessly nostalgic tribute to a highly specific period in the history of player training as a concept. Here's to you, tutorial levels. You were a fumbled, half-baked product of a neophyte's stumbling journey to success, but endearing for all that and fondly remembered nonetheless. The game mechanic equivalent of losing your virginity in the back of your dad's van.
This video is sponsored by Spell Rogue, your next deck-building roguelike obsession from Guidelight Games and Ghost Ship Publishing. Available now in early access. Cast powerful spells with the mythical mana dice, as you manipulate rolls to duplicate, split, flip, and enchant your cards with spell effects to bend fate to your will. Because Spell Rogue has deck building and dice rolling, and that's double the nerd things. Experiment with dozens of legendary artifacts and hundreds of upgradable spells to build some truly wild combinations, and those will come in handy as you attempt to cleanse the land and annihilate the monstrous Void Walkers. Because let's be honest, voids are very dangerous and nobody should be walking anywhere near them. Head on over to Spell Rogue's Steam page to learn more about the game and join in on the early access adventure today, because those mana dice ain't gonna roll themselves.